In 1985, Coca-Cola scrapped a 99-year-old recipe and replaced it with something sweeter. The country revolted. That same decade, grocery stores sold diet candy named after a deadly epidemic, breakfast cola, and bubblegum that squirted like soda. Here are 30 strange grocery items from the 80s that made no sense. New Coke landed on shelves in April of 1985, and the backlash was immediate. Coca-Cola had spent 4 years and over $4 million taste testing a sweeter formula on nearly 200,000 consumers. What they never tested was whether Americans were willing to surrender the original. Protest groups formed within days. A retired investor in Seattle began stockpiling cases of the old formula. Company hotlines fielded more than 40,000 complaint calls in the weeks that followed. The company's own bottlers revolted, refusing to push a product that retailers were already pulling from displays. 79 days after launch, Coca-Cola reversed course and brought back the original as Coca-Cola Classic, a retreat so effective it boosted sales beyond pre-launch numbers. The fiasco proved something no focus group could measure. Americans drank Coke for the ritual, not the recipe. Before energy drinks existed, Jolt Cola bragged about what was inside it. Launched in 1985 by retired Canada Dry bottler Joseph Rapp and his son out of Rochester, New York, the bright red can carried a dare for a slogan: all the sugar and twice the caffeine. Each serving packed 5.9 milligrams of caffeine per ounce, just under the FD, a legal ceiling of 6 milligrams per ounce. Within 3 months, Jolt had spread to 20 states. First-year revenue hit $1 million. But parent groups pushed back hard, and by 1987, sales had dropped by half. The soda survived as a niche product beloved by college students and early programmers, but never recovered its initial momentum. It was eventually discontinued in the late 2000s. Decades before the energy drink industry would normalize the same formula at triple the price. If the 80s had a monument to pointless engineering, it was the McDLT. McDonald's sold this burger in a two-sided styrofoam container the size of a small briefcase, one side for the hot patty and bottom bun, and the other for cold lettuce, tomato, and top bun. You assembled the sandwich yourself before eating it. A young Jason Alexander, years before Seinfeld made him a household name, sang and danced in the television commercial about keeping the hot side hot and the cool side cool. None of it worked as advertised. The lettuce was room temperature by the time you cracked open the lid. The bun was soggy from condensation trapped inside the sealed compartment. And the packaging used more polystyrene per unit than any other fast food item on the market, turning every trash can at every McDonald's into an overflowing monument to waste within hours of each lunch rush. When environmental groups turned their attention to styrofoam in the late 80s, the McDLT quietly vanished from the menu. That pink can of Tab was everywhere in the 80s, in break rooms, kitchen counters, handbags. Coca-Cola had launched it in 1963 as the first mainstream diet cola, sweetened with saccharin. The taste was sharp, metallic, and deeply polarizing. Then came the warning label. In the mid-70s, studies linked saccharin to bladder cancer in laboratory rats, and Congress mandated a printed notice on every product containing the sweetener. The printed notice said, "This product contains saccharin, which has been determined to cause cancer in laboratory animals." That disclaimer sat on every can of Tab for more than 20 years. Shoppers read it, shrugged, and kept drinking. More than 30 human studies eventually showed the rat findings did not apply to people, and the warning came off in 2000. Coca-Cola discontinued Tab in 2020, ending a 57-year run defined by its cancer notice as much as its taste. If Tab proved what Americans would drink despite a cancer warning, the Savory Jell-O salad proved what they would eat despite every instinct. By the early 1980s, the tradition of suspending actual food inside flavored gelatin was fading, but not gone. Church potlucks and holiday buffets across the Midwest still featured lime Jell-O packed with shredded cabbage, canned tuna, sliced olives, and celery, molded into ring shapes and served on beds of iceberg lettuce with a scoop of mayonnaise on top. Copper molds hung in kitchens like decorations, and recipe cards for perfection salad, a lemon gelatin creation with coleslaw suspended inside, circulated through church basements for decades. The practice dated to the 1950s, when Jell-O booklets filled whole sections of American cookbooks. By mid-decade, the national shift toward tossed salads and raw vegetables had turned the gelatin mold into a punchline. Utah held on longest. The state named Jell-O its official snack in 2001, years after the rest of the country had moved on. Lifesavers. Soda hit shelves in the early 80s with 5 familiar flavors: lime, grape, orange, pineapple, and fruit punch, and focus group results that predicted a winner. Early taste tests went well. Sales projections looked strong. But once the bottles reached actual stores, parents refused to put them in the cart. The name was the problem. Lifesavers meant candy, and a soda named after candy felt like buying your kids liquid sugar, which of course every soda already was. That psychological barrier proved fatal within a year. What made the failure so absurd was that Pepsi and Coca-Cola sold beverages with identical sugar content under names that sounded perfectly respectable, while Lifesavers was punished for transparency. The brand pulled every bottle and never attempted a soda line again. It was a case where honest branding was the worst marketing strategy available. Walk into any drugstore in the mid-80s, and you would find bubble gum flavored like Dr. Pepper, 7-Up, RC Cola, and Cherry 7-Up, officially licensed, 5 pieces to a pack, each hiding a liquid center that squirted when you bit down. Freshen Up Gum pioneered the concept back in 1975 with an unforgettable slogan, "The gum that goes squirt." It stayed on shelves for over 4 decades before finally disappearing in 2019. Soda versions pushed the idea further, trying to replicate the carbonated bite of an actual soft drink inside chewing gum. The flavor lasted about 45 seconds. After that, you were grinding a tasteless rubber pellet that smelled faintly of a vending machine hallway. The whole concept assumed kids wanted their candy to taste like beverages, which raised the one question nobody at any gum company ever asked: why not just buy the soda? Figurines were crunchy wafer bars in pastel packaging, marketed almost exclusively to women who wanted to skip meals without calling it that. Introduced in the mid-70s and popular well into the 80s, each pouch held about 300 calories of fat, sugar, and a handful of added vitamins, just enough to call itself a meal replacement. The advertising leaned on aspiration. Slim women in fitted clothing, the quiet implication that real food was the obstacle standing between you and the body you wanted. What the packaging never acknowledged was the broader pattern. Teenage girls paired these bars with Tab, caffeine pills, and cigarettes as a starvation routine that passed for dieting in the late 70s and early 80s. Figurines were not the cause of disordered eating, but they fit neatly into the system, 300 calories dressed up as willpower. They disappeared in the 90s, replaced by protein bars using the same playbook. Pepsi AM arrived in 1989 as the answer to a question no one asked. What if breakfast came in a cola can? The formula packed 28% more caffeine than regular Pepsi, but still 77% less than a cup of coffee. Ads urged viewers to swap their morning cup for a cold soda alongside cereal and toast. Consumers chose coffee. The product collapsed within months. What made it particularly strange was that Coca-Cola had already tried a similar campaign suggesting people drink Coke in the morning, and that push had also failed completely. The American breakfast ritual, built around hot coffee and maybe a glass of juice, was not something a soda company could disrupt with extra caffeine and a redesigned label. No major brand has attempted a breakfast cola since. Carnation breakfast bars promised a complete meal in a foil-wrapped rectangle that tasted like a candy bar. Sold in chocolate, chocolate chip, and peanut butter crunch varieties, each one delivered a burst of sweetness kids could finish on the school bus before the first bell. Carnation marketed them as the sensible alternative to a sit-down breakfast, something a parent could hand over on the way out the door and still feel responsible about. The bars carried added vitamins for a health halo, but sugar appeared among the first 3 ingredients on every label. They lined supermarket aisles throughout the decade, shelved between granola and instant oatmeal, and they sold well because the pitch worked. Busy mornings demanded shortcuts, and a candy bar with a vitamin label felt like a reasonable one. They eventually vanished. They were replaced by products that followed the identical formula. Wrap something sweet in a health claim. But none of those products carried a name that could destroy a brand overnight. Ayds was a caramel-flavored appetite suppressant candy sold in drugstores since the 1940s, and for decades it moved steadily off shelves without controversy. The active ingredient was originally benzocaine, a topical anesthetic meant to dull the taste buds. Later versions switched to phenylpropanolamine, a stimulant the FDA would eventually pull from the market entirely over stroke risk. None of that killed the brand. What killed it was a coincidence so devastating that no marketing campaign could survive it. By the mid-'80s, a deadly epidemic called Ayds dominated every headline, and the diet candy shared its exact pronunciation. Sales collapsed by 50%. A company executive told a newspaper in 1985 that the people who suffer from that disease are not the same people trying to lose weight. They rebranded to Diet Ayds in 1988. It made no difference. The product vanished. It was the most catastrophic name collision in American grocery history. In 1985, Chicago Tribune columnist Bob Greene wrote about a little-known regional drink called Canfield's Diet Chocolate Fudge Soda, and within days, a Midwest curiosity became a national craze. The A.J. Canfield Company had been quietly bottling the stuff since 1972, moving about 1.5 million cans per year, almost all of them within driving distance of Chicago. Greene's column rewired the product's trajectory overnight. Orders flooded in from every state. Stores could not keep it in stock. The promise, zero-calorie chocolate indulgence, was irresistible in a decade consumed by diet soda mania. The actual liquid was thin, artificially sweetened, and bore only a passing resemblance to chocolate. Major brands rushed out their own versions. Not one survived. The craze burned through summer and fizzled by autumn. Canfield's eventually folded, but for a few strange months, America believed chocolate diet soda was the future of beverages. In 1968, a doctor wrote a letter to the New England Journal of Medicine describing numbness, weakness, and heart palpitations after eating at a Chinese restaurant. He speculated monosodium glutamate might be to blame. That single letter, not a peer-reviewed study, not a clinical trial, just one doctor's correspondence, triggered 2 decades of panic. By the early 80s, restaurants across the country posted signs that read, "No MSG," as if the seasoning were poison. Grocery stores pulled products containing it from their shelves. The condition picked up an official-sounding label, Chinese restaurant syndrome. Controlled studies struggled to replicate the symptoms under laboratory conditions. In 1987, the World Health Organization declared MSG safe and assigned it no limit on daily intake, their most favorable classification for any food additive. The science was settled, but the stigma was already permanent. Restaurants still advertise no MSG to this day, selling the absence of a problem that never existed. Every morning in the 1980s, you poured cereal into a bowl without reading the side of the box. If you had, you would have found BHA and BHT listed among the ingredients, two synthetic preservatives added to keep fats from going rancid. They were in your potato chips, your chewing gum, your frozen sausages, and nearly every shelf-stable snack in the supermarket. The Department of Health and Human Services listed BHA as reasonably anticipated to be a human carcinogen. The International Agency for Research on Cancer classified it as possibly carcinogenic. Europe restricted both compounds. Japan pulled BHA from food entirely. The FDA looked at the data and decided American exposure levels were acceptable, a conclusion that has not been updated since. BHA and BHT remain in thousands of products today. The preservatives that kept your cereal fresh in 1983 are still keeping it fresh now, under a safety ruling that is decades old. The preservatives in your cereal were hidden in fine print. The Alar scare of 1989 played out on national television. In February, the Natural Resources Defense Council released a report claiming that Alar, a growth-regulating chemical sprayed on apples to improve their color and keep them on the tree longer, posed a serious cancer risk to young kids who drank apple juice. The story aired on 60 Minutes. Within days, school districts pulled apples from cafeteria menus. Parents dumped juice bottles down kitchen drains. Apple growers in Washington state lost an estimated $100 million. The manufacturer, Uniroyal Chemical, voluntarily withdrew Alar before the EPA formally revoked its tolerances in 1990. Later analysis suggested the risk had been overstated. The doses in the animal studies far exceeded anything a child would consume, but the damage was already done. An entire apple season was destroyed by a news cycle that outran the science behind it. Colgate, the toothpaste company, once tried to sell frozen dinners. Colgate kitchen entrees appeared on store shelves with the same red logo Americans associated with brushing their teeth before bed. The thinking, presumably, was that brand recognition would carry the product into a new market. It did not. Shoppers could not separate the minty associations of Colgate from the idea of eating a Colgate-branded lasagna or a Colgate-branded beef stew. The product failed so quickly and so thoroughly that even its exact launch date is disputed. Some retail historians place it in the 1960s, others in the 80s. What nobody disputes is the outcome. Colgate kitchen entrees became a textbook case of brand overextension, taught in marketing courses for decades afterward as the definitive example of what happens when a company assumes its name means trust in every category rather than trust in one. Downyflake's toaster eggs tried to ride the same convenience wave that made Pop-Tarts a household name. The concept was simple. It was a flat disk of processed egg product wrapped in foil, designed to be heated in a standard toaster and eaten like a breakfast pastry. The texture landed somewhere between a rubber coaster and a hockey puck. The taste was aggressively bland, warm, rubbery, and faintly sulfuric. Unlike Pop-Tarts, which at least delivered sugar, toaster eggs delivered nothing but the grim sensation of eating something engineered in a laboratory and approved by no one who actually had to consume it. The product vanished quickly, leaving behind only its reputation as one of the most misguided breakfast items ever conceived. It was proof that convenience, taken far enough, eventually becomes its own punishment. Hobline's wine and dine dinner sounded elegant on paper. It was a boxed meal kit that included everything you needed for a complete dinner, right down to a small bottle of wine tucked inside the packaging. The chicken chablis version was the flagship, but the problem was the wine. It was cooking wine, loaded with salt and preservatives, meant to be poured into a pan and reduced, not sipped from a glass. The packaging did not make this distinction clear, and consumers across the country cracked open that little bottle expecting a pleasant dinner companion. What they got instead was one of the most unpleasant sips of their lives, salty, harsh, and completely undrinkable as a beverage. The meal itself was passable, but the wine fiasco overshadowed everything. Hobline pulled the product after consumer complaints mounted, and the concept of packaging cooking wine as though it were table wine became a permanent cautionary tale in food marketing. Gerber, the baby food company, decided in 1974 that single adults needed their own line of jarred meals. The result was Gerber Singles, small glass jars of pureed food in flavors like beef burgundy, Mediterranean vegetables, and blueberry delight, sold alongside infant formula and strained peas. To save money, Gerber packaged them in the same jars they used for baby food. The name, the jars, and the mashed consistency created an image so depressing that almost no one wanted to be seen buying it. A single adult standing in the baby food aisle, placing a jar of pureed beef into a shopping basket. The product survived approximately 3 months before Gerber pulled it from shelves. The concept was not entirely wrong. Convenience meals for one person would become a massive market within a decade, but Gerber had made the fatal error of packaging adult food in a format that made the buyer feel like an infant. If Gerber's mistake was packaging, the story of Red Dye No. 3 was something far worse. A regulatory failure stretched across 3 decades. The synthetic coloring, derived from petroleum and approved for American food in 1907, gave candy, cereal, and maraschino cherries their bright cherry red color. In the 80s, animal studies revealed that high doses caused thyroid cancer in male rats. Federal law, specifically the Delaney Clause, required the FDA to ban any additive shown to cause cancer in humans or animals. The agency used that exact law to ban the dye from cosmetics and topical drugs in 1990. Then it stopped. The FDA promised to act on food. It never did. For over 30 years, the same dye that was illegal in your lipstick remained legal in the candy your kids ate after school. More than 9,000 products still contained it. The FDA finally banned Red 3 from food in 2025, 35 years after it acknowledged the cancer link. Throughout the early 80s, salad bars were everywhere, in grocery stores, steakhouses, and family restaurants coast to coast. The lettuce always looked impossibly crisp. The fruit never browned. The reason was sulfites, preservative compounds sprayed directly onto raw produce to prevent discoloration and maintain freshness long after the food should have wilted. For most people, sulfites were harmless. For roughly 1 in 100, particularly asthmatics, they were dangerous. Reactions ranged from headaches and flushing to severe bronchial episodes. In the worst cases, sulfites triggered anaphylaxis. Multiple deaths were reported. In 1986, the FDA banned sulfites on fresh fruits and vegetables, ending the practice on salad bars. The compounds remain legal in wine, dried fruit, and dozens of processed foods, just not on the lettuce that once made you think you were eating something healthy. The hot dog you packed in your lunchbox every day of the 1980s owed its pink color and long shelf life to sodium nitrite, a preservative used in virtually every processed meat product on the market, from bacon and ham to bologna and deli slices. Sodium nitrite prevented bacterial growth and kept the meat from turning the grayish-brown color it would naturally become. It also reacted inside the human digestive system to form compounds called nitrosamines, which multiple studies linked to increased cancer risk, particularly in the stomach and colon. The FDA reviewed its standards for nitrite use in the 1980s and decided the benefits of preventing botulism outweighed the cancer concern. That review has not been meaningfully updated since. Sodium nitrite remains in virtually every packaged hot dog, strip of bacon, and slice of deli meat sold in America. The preservative your body was never designed to process, approved under a risk calculation that is now decades old. Squeeze-It drinks came in plastic bottles shaped like barrels, and every one of them was a color that did not exist in nature, like electric blue, radioactive orange, and neon green. General Mills launched the line in the mid-'80s, marketing them directly to kids with cartoon faces printed on the bottles and flavor names that had nothing to do with actual fruit. The ingredient list read like a chemistry experiment: water, high fructose corn syrup, and a rotating cast of artificial dyes and flavors designed to make the liquid as bright and sweet as possible. Parents packed them in lunch boxes because they were cheap, portable, and sealed. Kids drank them because they tasted like candy. Nobody looked too closely at what was actually in the bottle. Squeeze-It was discontinued in 2001 as public sentiment turned against products loaded with artificial colors aimed at young consumers, but not before an entire generation grew up treating neon sugar water as a normal part of lunch. The Oreo Big Stuff was exactly what it sounded like: a single Oreo cookie the size of your palm, individually wrapped in plastic and sold as a standalone snack. It hit shelves in 1984 and stayed for 7 years. The cookie kept the same basic ratio of chocolate wafer to vanilla cream, just scaled up to absurd proportions. There was no practical reason for it to exist. A regular Oreo worked fine. A sleeve of regular Oreos gave you the same amount of cookie in a more sensible format. But the Big Stuff sold on spectacle, the sheer ridiculousness of holding one giant cookie in your hand and eating it like a sandwich. It was discontinued in 1991, and no full-sized replacement has appeared since, though fans still campaign for its return with the kind of devotion usually reserved for discontinued sodas. If a giant cookie was harmless excess, what Kellogg's did with C-3PO cereal was something stranger, a product that disappeared not because it failed on taste, but because the cultural moment it depended on collapsed overnight. The honey-flavored cereal launched in 1984, riding the Star Wars franchise while Return of the Jedi was still fresh in theaters. 2 years later, it was gone. Kellogg's never gave an official reason, but some retail analysts have pointed to a theory that has lingered for decades: the Challenger disaster in January of 1986, which killed 7 crew members on live television, watched by millions of school children, may have made anything space-themed suddenly uncomfortable to market. Overnight, the wonder of space became associated with tragedy. Products tied to the cosmos quietly disappeared from shelves across multiple categories. C-3POs was one of them. Whether Challenger was the direct cause or simply the backdrop, the cereal vanished at exactly the moment America stopped looking at the stars with excitement. Ralston Purina, a company best known for making dog food, produced the Nintendo cereal system in 1988. It was designed to sell itself on the box alone. The package was split down the middle. One side dispensed Super Mario Bros. Cereal shaped like small mushrooms and Goombas. The other side dispensed Legend of Zelda cereal shaped like shields, keys, and links. Both sides were sugar delivery systems with food coloring and not much else. The cereal tasted identical on either side: crunchy, sweet, and vaguely fruity, because it essentially was the same product in different molds. Ralston banked everything on the Nintendo name. For a brief window in 1988, kids begged for it. The novelty wore off in about one grocery cycle. The product lasted a single year before it was pulled, leaving behind only a collector's item box and the memory of eating a dog food company cereal shaped like a video game. Hi-C Ecto-Cooler launched in 1987 as a cross-promotion with the Ghostbusters franchise, and it should have disappeared the moment the marketing deal expired. Instead, it outlasted the cartoon, the sequel, and the decade. The drink was bright green, a shade so vivid it looked like something you would find in a laboratory rather than a juice box. The Slimer character grinned from the front of every carton, and kids treated the color as a feature, not a warning. The ingredient list was built around high fructose corn syrup, citric acid, and enough artificial coloring to tint bath water. High C quietly renamed it Schouten Orange Tanger Green after the licensing deal ended, then Crazy Citrus Cooler, then dropped it entirely. It came back briefly in 2016 for the Ghostbusters reboot, sold in aluminum cans that changed color when cold. Fans stockpiled cases. The drink was never about juice. It was about drinking something that looked radioactive and getting away with it. Between 1986 and 1989, you could buy Ghostbusters bubblegum packaged in a toothpaste tube. The gum was bright green, thick, and designed to be squeezed directly from the tube into your mouth. A delivery system that looked exactly like brushing your teeth with slime. The packaging featured Slimer, the ghost who ate everything, and the consistency was closer to paste than to any gum you had ever chewed. You squeezed out a ribbon of green goo, bit off a piece, and worked it into something barely chewable. The flavor was sweet and vaguely artificial, not quite lime, not quite mint, just green. It stained fingers, lips, and occasionally clothing. The product existed for no reason other than to capitalize on the Ghostbusters brand during its peak, and it worked exactly as intended. Kids wanted it because it was gross, and being gross was the entire point. Jell-O pudding pops were one of the most beloved frozen treats of the entire decade. Smooth, creamy bars of frozen pudding sold in chocolate, vanilla, and the signature swirl flavor that layered both together on a single stick. They hit freezer aisles in the early 1980s and became a staple of summer afternoons, positioned somewhere between ice cream and a popsicle, but with a texture that belonged to neither. The brand's television spokesman was Bill Cosby, who appeared in commercial after commercial with the warm, fatherly persona that made him one of the most trusted figures in American entertainment. Pudding pops eventually declined in sales and were discontinued in the early 2000s. Then, in 2018, the spokesman was convicted of sexual assault, a revelation that retroactively stained every cheerful commercial, every family-friendly endorsement, and every memory of a product that millions of Americans had associated with warmth and trust. The pudding pop itself was innocent. The man selling it was not. Ready Bacon was produced by the makers of Ready Whip, and it promised to deliver hot, crispy bacon straight from your toaster. The concept was straightforward. Pre-cooked strips of bacon were wrapped in foil packets with an absorbent pad inside to catch the grease. You slid the packet into your toaster, waited a few minutes, and pulled out breakfast. The problem was the absorbent pad. It did not absorb enough. Grease leaked from torn or damaged foil, dripped onto the heating elements, and created a genuine fire hazard inside the appliance. The product never made it past test markets. It was pulled before a national launch, remembered only by the people who tried it and the patent filing that still exists in public records. Decades later, microwave bacon would accomplish what Ready Bacon could not. But in the 80s, the idea of cooking meat inside the same slot where you toasted bread was considered innovative rather than dangerous. They sold it, you bought it, and nobody asked a single question. If this list surprised you, like and subscribe.